And mama said it would be days like this. Stand tall on that business, you was made for it.
The first sign that something had gone very wrong came inside a house on Harmons Hill Road in Sussex County, Delaware. It was January of 2014. The house belonged to a man named Cletus Nelson. At some point that night, people entered the home through a window. Inside the house with Nelson was another man, William Hopkins. What started as a robbery turned into something far worse. Both men were shot. By the time anyone realized what had happened, they were already dead. The house showed signs of a violent struggle. Things had been moved around. Property had been taken. Investigators would later say that around $7,000 in cash was stolen during the robbery. At first, detectives were dealing with what looked like a double homicide tied to a home invasion. But as the investigation continued, the case began to widen. The people responsible for the killings were not just connected to that one crime. They were part of something bigger, something that had already been happening across southern Delaware. And eventually, investigators believed the person at the center of it all was a man named Steven Kellum. Kellum was from Seaford, a small city in Sussex County. By the time police started building their case against him, they believed he had created and led a network of people involved in robberies, drug trafficking, and violent home invasions across Sussex and Kent counties. The way investigators described it later, the crimes were not random. The people involved were looking for specific targets. They were going after homes where they believed drugs or cash would be present. The thinking behind it was simple. If someone was involved in dealing drugs, there was a good chance they might have large amounts of money or narcotics inside their house. And just as important, those victims might be less likely to go to the police afterward. It was a dangerous strategy, but for a while, it worked. According to prosecutors, Kellum was the one organizing things. They said he directed other people, helped plan the robberies, and sometimes supplied the firearms used during the crimes. The people investigators eventually connected to the group included Ramir Waples, Richard Robinson, Shamir Stratton, Carlton Gibbs, and several others. Some of them would later admit their involvement. Others would fight the charges in court. But before any of that happened, the crimes themselves had already started piling up. The robbery that ended in the deaths of Cletus Nelson and William Hopkins was not the only violent incident investigators were looking into. In May of 2014, another home invasion took place in the Oak Orchard area near Millsboro. During that robbery, a 24-year-old man was pistol whipped by intruders who forced their way into the house. A few months later, in August of that same year, there was another attempted home invasion on Chris Drive in Millsboro. The suspects tried to kick in the door of the house, but the people inside managed to hold it shut long enough to call police. The attackers left before officers arrived. Then in December, another robbery happened on Sandy Drive. This time, the violence escalated again. A man inside the house was beaten with a gun, and a woman who was there was also assaulted. Just a few days after that robbery, there was yet another one on Cordry Road, also in the Millsboro area. During that incident, one of the victims was actually shot. Each of these crimes happened in different places, but investigators eventually began to see a pattern. The same kinds of tactics kept appearing: forced entries, guns, victims being threatened or assaulted until they handed over money or drugs. Slowly, detectives began connecting the names of people involved in one robbery to people involved in another. By early 2015, the investigation had grown large enough that multiple agencies were working together on it. The Delaware State Police partnered with the Delaware Department of Justice, and other law enforcement groups joined the effort as well. The operation eventually received a name. They called it Operation In the House. The name came from the nature of the crimes themselves. These were home invasions, people breaking into houses, usually at night, looking for drugs, money, or anything valuable they could take. For months, investigators gathered evidence. They conducted interviews with witnesses and suspects. They examined phone records. They carried out surveillance and worked to identify everyone connected to the network. By the time they were ready to move forward with arrests, authorities believed the operation involved dozens of people. When the indictments finally came down, the scale of the case became clear. A Sussex County grand jury charged 35 people in connection with the investigation. Search warrants were executed across Kent and Sussex counties. During those searches, police seized large quantities of drugs, including cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. They also recovered firearms, cash, and vehicles tied to the criminal operation. For law enforcement in southern Delaware, it was one of the largest organized crime cases they had handled in years. But the most serious charges still centered on the robbery that ended in the deaths of Nelson and Hopkins. Prosecutors believed several men had entered the house that night. Testimony later presented in court described how someone climbed through a window and then allowed others to come inside. The plan, according to investigators, was to rob the house. Instead, it turned into a double homicide. During the robbery, Nelson and Hopkins were shot. Afterward, the attackers fled with the cash they had taken from the house. The investigation into that crime eventually led detectives to the people they believed were responsible. Several of the suspects connected to the robbery later faced their own trials or reached plea agreements with prosecutors. One of them, Richard Robinson, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and racketeering charges. Shamir Stratton admitted to charges related to home invasion and robbery. Carlton Gibbs also pleaded guilty to robbery charges. Another suspect, Ramir Waples, went to trial and was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with other offenses. But Steven Kellum was the person prosecutors described as the leader of the entire operation. When he was arrested, the list of charges against him was enormous. Investigators accused him not only of involvement in the murders, but also of directing the criminal enterprise responsible for the robberies and drug trafficking connected to the case. In total, he was charged with 81 criminal counts. The case eventually went to trial in 2017. During the trial, prosecutors presented their theory of what had happened. They argued that Kellum organized the robberies, supplied weapons, and directed the people carrying them out. They said the crimes were part of a coordinated network that targeted homes believed to contain drugs or cash. The defense challenged that version of events, questioning the reliability of some of the witnesses who testified during the trial. But after hearing the evidence, the jury reached a decision. In September of 2017, Steven Kellum was found guilty. The convictions included 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with racketeering, home invasion, robbery, and numerous weapons offenses. The verdict meant that the case had reached its final stage, sentencing. That happened in March of 2018. When the judge announced the sentence, it was clear that Kellum would never leave prison. He received 2 life sentences plus an additional 769 years behind bars. For prosecutors and investigators, the sentence marked the end of a long and complicated investigation that had stretched over several years. Operation In the House had started with a double homicide and eventually uncovered a criminal network operating across multiple counties. More than 30 people had been charged. Large amounts of drugs and weapons had been seized, and the man authorities described as the leader of the operation would spend the rest of his life in prison.